All right. Hello, lads and lasses. Hey, if you like today's lesson, then please get a job in a fortune cookie factory and replace all the fortune messages with little pieces of paper with the phrase, I heart art, as this would really help to spread the good word of my class. All right, let me teach you guys how to take notes in my class. This will be the first time that you're taking notes, so let me show you how it's done. Go ahead and write this down. And I want you to write this down too. Anything that is written in green, I want you to copy down. And then anything that is in white, you do not have to copy it down. Sometimes there's extra text up there that's not necessary, but it's just to remind me of what to talk about. All right, and so this is why I want you to write stuff down with your a pen or a pencil, because this is how it works. All right, the teacher at the front of the class has the information that he wants to give to the students, and as he teaches, he's giving that information to the students, and that information is going into your eyes and ears, and in my case, mostly your eyes, and that information goes through the eyes and to the brain. And then the brain uses the nervous system to send the information from the brain down the nervous system to the hand. And then that results in you copying down the notes. And then this is the evidence, like your notes are the evidence that the information came from me and it went through your brain. And that's why we do it like this. Okay, so go ahead and copy this down. Copy down what is art and then copy down the language of art. In the world, we use words to either spoken or written to communicate a message. If I have something in my head that I want you to know, I'll tell it to you or I'll write it down and you can read it. That's how we communicate from one person to another. However, there are some times when the communication doesn't work. If especially when there's a language barrier. If I speak one language and you speak another language, it's hard for me to communicate from me to you if we don't speak the same language. But people use art to express their ideas. For example, let's take a look at this picture right here. This is a painting by Raphael. He was an Italian Renaissance painter, and he lived in the 1500s. And what language do you think he spoke if he was an Italian Renaissance artist? And the answer is obviously he spoke Italian. Now, do you know Italian? I don't know Italian, but you don't have to know Italian to understand the story that's being told in this picture. So, for example, what is going on in the picture? Who is this guy right here? Or what is his job? A lot of my students will say, well, that's a knight. And the question is, how can you tell he's a knight? And it's because of the armor that he's wearing. What is he doing? And my students will often say, well, he's stabbing something. Well, what is this thing right here? Well, the answer is a dragon. And so the in the 1500s, the Renaissance artists had a different view or a different idea of what a dragon was. But that's a dragon down there. And why is he killing the dragon? And a lot of my students will say, well, it's to save the woman that back there, the maiden in distress. So the knight is protecting the maiden from the dragon by killing the dragon. See, that's a simple story, and it doesn't take you knowing Italian to know what the story is trying to tell you. So that's how art communicates across languages. And the artists use the elements of art and the principles of design. So go ahead and write this down. This is the definition of the elements of art. And the elements of art is the basic visual devices artists use to create art. And you can stop the video if you want to stop it, but I'm going to move on. So go ahead and write that down and write down all these terms. Write down line, shape, form, space, texture, color, and value. And once again, you can pause the video to write this down, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. Also, I want you to write down principles of design. And the definition for the principles of design is these are the rules that the artists use to create certain effects, or it's the rules for using the elements of art to produce certain effects. And the principles of design are rhythm, movement, balance, proportion, variety, emphasis, unity. And once again, it's my expectation that you will copy all this down. So you might want to pause the video and do that. All right, copy this down. Medium. Medium is the material that is used to make an art object. What is the artwork made of? Like, what materials are in it that make it? So here's an example. You might probably familiar with this painting. It's called the Mona Lisa, and it is oil paint on linen. So linen is like a thin canvas. It's almost like a bed sheet. So somebody stretched a bed sheet around a wooden frame, and then they painted on it with oil paint. And that's paint that's made with oil. So the medium of the Mona Lisa is oil on linen. This painting is acrylic on canvas. They used acrylic paint on canvas, and canvas is like a fabric that is like a thick fabric. It's on a sailboat. The sails are made from canvas. That's what canvas is. Watercolor on paper. There's tempera on a board, like a wooden board or a masonite board, and we'll be using tempera in our class this year. Graphite. Graphite is a fancy word for what? And sometimes my students know and sometimes they don't. Graphite is basically just a pencil. So this was drawn with a pencil. And this was drawn with charcoal. A lot of my drawings are done with charcoal. I really love charcoal because it gets these really dark blacks in the artwork. All right, a student drew this with colored pencil. You might have seen these on the internet. This guy goes and draws on sidewalks, and it looks like the object is really there. So for example, he drew a globe, but he drew it all stretched out. But if you look at it from one point of view, it looks like he's standing on top of the world, but it's just an optical illusion. Chalk pastel and then oil pastel. Chalk pastel is like it's like real chalky and crumbly, and oil pastel has like a oily texture to it. This artist made a sculpture out of wood. This artist made a sculpture out of marble that's made out of stone. And then this artist used bronze, which is like a metal. This guy right here made his sculpture out of fiberglass. And that rabbit is made out of clay. The scorpion is made out of wire. And you can make art with found objects. So somebody recreated Stonehenge from England with cars, and they called it Carhenge. And then here is a sculpture that's made out of found objects. And I always ask my students, what kind of objects can you see in here? And since this is a video, I can't really hear your responses. But I can see there's screws and there's coins and spoons are the things that are easy to identify in this little sculpture. And then here, this guy, John Chamberlain, he makes sculptures out of bent up car parts. So these are like car fenders and hoods that are all welded together to make a work of art. All right, serigraphy is a material that's used for making art. So here's how serigraphy works. It's often called silkscreen. So you have a wooden frame, that's that gray frame that goes around the picture, and a silk fabric that goes across one side of that gray frame or the wooden frame. And then they put stencils on there, and then they put ink on there. So you can see the ink this picture is pink. It's pink ink. And they use a squeegee to pull the ink across. So here's a person using a squeegee to pull green ink across the silkscreen unit. So, and then if you ever wear t-shirts that have a slogan on it, This is how t-shirts are made. So this guy is screen printing an image onto a t-shirt. And then when he lifts the unit up, you can see the image that he made on the t-shirt. A linoleum and woodcut is the same kind of process. It's just two different materials, but that's where you take a block of something. In this case, in that picture, it's linoleum, but you can easily do this with a like a like wood. You use a sharp tool to cut out all the parts that you don't want. All the parts that you want to be white, you scrape them or you dig them out. And then you use a brayer and ink to roll across on the top. And the ink sticks to the top, and then when you press it on the paper, it makes an image. It's the same kind of concept as a stamp. You ever played with a rubber stamp? You put it in the ink, and then you push it onto paper, and it makes a picture or a word. And then etching and engraving, those are both types of intaglio, and it's the opposite of the linoleum and woodcut that we just did, where the ink goes into the groove and it's wiped off the surface. And when you press the plate into the paper, the ink that's inside the grooves gets pushed onto the paper. And so that's where these images come from. So, like every line in that image on the right, that was ink that was inside of a groove that was cut into a metal plate. You can make art out of cheese. You can make art out of cardboard. Have you ever seen an ice sculpture? Those of you that do that are going to go to prom, I don't know if there's going to be a prom this year for COVID, or hopefully there will be, but there's always an ice sculpture in the prom in the dance area. So that's always fun to look at. You can make art with spray paint. I found this guy online. He draws pictures on a styrofoam cups and then sells them. And then people make art out of sand. They have sandcastle competitions on the beaches, and I'm always amazed at how people can make such amazing things with sand. When I take my family to the sand or to the beach, and we do little sandcastles, I can't get my sandcastle to stay like over like 7 or 8 inches tall, and it just crumbles apart. I don't know how these guys do it. It's amazing. You can make sculpture out of butter. So this is a sculpture that I made when I was in my 20s and working at a summer camp. So let me tell you a story about this sculpture. This was a summer camp, and in the middle of the summer, they had a parent day. And so parents would come and visit their kids, and they had a big feast, and they always like to have a large butter sculpture as the focal point of the feast. And so they asked me if I would make a butter sculpture. And so, yes, I said that I would. And so they gave me a 60-pound block of butter. And some friends of mine and we carved it using carving tools from the sculpture classroom. And when butter gets warm, it melts. So the warmth from our hands and the warmth in the room was causing the butter to get soft and melt. So we had it on a rolling cart, and so we would roll it back into the freezer that was in the kitchen, this giant freezer that you could walk into. So we'd roll it in there for a little while to let it get cold and workable again, and then we would pull it out, and then we would carve on it again. So it's a matter of like, when it got too warm, we put it back and then we bring it out, and it just kept going like that. The butter on our hands was melting. So we had melted butter all over our hands, which made our hands like really slimy. And as we were touching our tools, the tools were becoming slimy. And it was common for the tools to fall out of our hands and fall on the floor. Now, the dirt from the bottom of our shoes and the pieces of butter that were falling off of the sculpture and falling off of our hands were falling on the floor and melting. So the dirt from our shoes was mixing with the butter that was on the floor, and then it was getting kind of slippery. So we added salt to the floor to make a grit so we didn't slip on the slippery butter that was melted on the floor. Well, our sculpture tools were falling off and into that stuff, and we were just picking it up and continuing to sculpt with these sculpture tools. So it was a very we saw the butter as like more of a sculpture tool than something that you would eat. So we weren't thinking of hygiene at this point. And so we finished the sculpture, and the very next day in the cafeteria, I went into the cafeteria, and they were serving on it. You had your tray, and they put pancakes on your tray, and then they'd have melted butter, and they with a ladle, and they would ladle it over. And I asked the cook, "What happened to the butter sculpture that we made?" And he said, "You're eating it." And I just thought about all the dirty tools that we were using on that butter and how it was just sitting out for a while. It was just I wasn't. And then the other thing that grossed me out was the butter had gotten all over me. Like I had touched my face, while doing the butter sculpture, and there was like my face was greasy, and then I had touched my hair, and the hair was greasy, and and no matter how hot a shower I took, it could not get that greasy feeling off of my skin and hair for about 2 weeks. It was really disgusting. Um, and so that's my experience with butter sculpture. So this is one of the sculptures that I made, and the name of the camp was called Island Lake. So you see the banner across the top of Island Lake, and I did these like Roman type columns on it. And then my friends and I thought it would be funny just to have a sculpture of a foot. So we did a sculpture of a foot. The previous year, we did. This is another butter sculpture that I worked on. It has two campers back to back, and one of the campers is holding a baseball bat, and I think the other one was. I can't remember what the girl was doing. And this is the only photograph that I have of it. So I wish I had a better photo. I didn't really think of it as a work of art at the time. So, anyways, so my point is you can make a sculpture out of butter. Now, here is a much better butter sculpture. Somebody had made a sculpture out of butter of Darth Vader. All right, you can make sculptures out of snow. You can make art out of gum, and that's not chewed gum. That's just strips of gum that somebody cut apart and stuck together. You can make art out of car tires, and you can make art out of an etch-a-sketch. You ever have an etch-a-sketch when you were little? It was when I had an etch-a-sketch when I was little. It was very difficult to make art with it. It was just to draw a circle or a square or something was very difficult, and I can't imagine the skill that it took of the artist that did this to make that image. Here's a guy I found online that draws pictures in the dirt on car windows. And then I even found somebody online that makes art out of human skin. And every time I show this particular picture, the whole class moans and is grossed out. And they ask me, "Is it legal?" I have no idea. I just found this picture online of a guy that makes art with human skin. I don't know where he gets his skin from or how or what. I don't know. It's really disgusting and gross. You can make art out of Legos. You can make art with a blue ballpoint pen. Isn't that amazing drawing with a blue ballpoint pen? That's just a simple Bic pen, and it looks like a photograph. These people painted on their skin and made art. Somebody took apart a typewriter and turned it into a sculpture. You can make art with watermelons. And you can make art with Crayola crayons. Does this look like the drawings you did when you were little with Crayola crayons? Like some people really get good at that. Instead of using pencils to draw, you can use pencils to make sculptures. And these are topiaries. A topiary is a bush that's carved into the shape of an animal or something. Oh, I found this one. Somebody recreated, not Silent Night, but oh my gosh, I'm having a brain fart. Starry Night with bacon. And then here is like a high school gym where they created Starry Night with cereal. And if you look down on the bottom, these are big boxes of cereal. So that's a big box of red cereal, and then they use different colored cereals to put it over onto the floor, and they recreated a, Starry Night with cereal. I don't know how these people are walking on it and not messing it up. I don't know how this is done, but that is really an imaginative use of cereal, and it took a big vision to make that happen. I found this guy online. He draws on bowling pins and sells them. This guy hammers nails into a piece of wood. That's his art. That's a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. This guy made a portraits out of barcodes. Somebody made the Mona Lisa with cups of coffee, and if you look close, some of the cups of coffee is just milk, some of it's just coffee, and some of it is a variation of like light coffee, dark coffee, depending on how much milk and coffee are in it. Somebody made a portraits with maps, and this guy he shoots holes into a piece of metal, and then it creates art. So bullet holes in steel is a way to make art. Somebody takes empty toilet paper rolls and makes images inside of them, little stories. You can carve lipstick. You can make art with coffee, like the coffee stains the paper and makes it go brown. This guy melted cassette tapes and formed them into a skull. And then here somebody drew on their Scantron, made this picture on the Scantron. I would not suggest you do that on your Scantron, so because Scantrons are usually for taking tests, and if you're drawing pictures instead of answering the questions properly, you probably won't get a very good score on your test. But my point of all of this is like, what can art be made out of? Like, what kind of materials can you use to make art? And usually, when I ask that to my students, they all say everything. You can make art out of anything, or you can use everything to make art. And that is certainly true. All right, the next thing I want to move on to is that the textbook talks about is subject, form, and content. So go ahead and copy this down, copy down subject, the part of an artwork that is easy to recognize. And pause the video if you need to, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. If you look at this image, by the way, this is a painting of called the 8th of May or the 3rd of May, 1808. And the guys on the, well, I'm not going to go into that just right now, but the subject is what you can easily recognize in the painting. So what is the subject of this painting? And you can, I usually pause it to allow my students to answer, but this is a video, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. The subject is a group of men pointing rifles at another group of men or people. So a group of people shooting or pointing guns at another group of people. And that is the subject of this. All right. It's as easy as that. Don't try to read into it. Don't try to see what it's really about. The subject is very superficial. Group of people pointing guns at another group of people. All right, the form is the artist's unique way of using the elements. And if you want to pause the video to copy that down, but I'm going to go ahead and keep talking. So look at the sky in that. Like what color should the sky be? You know, should the sky be blue or is this nighttime? But look at that sky. Is that like a real brownish kind of night? And look at the colors that are all around. I see a lot of browns and grays all over this picture, and the only real color I see is like in their skin tones and the green pants and the dried red blood on the ground. But everything else is variations of gray and brown, and that creates a mood, you know. And the artist chose those colors specifically, and he chose that time of day specifically to make it more dramatic. And look at how, like, look at what the emphasis is in this picture. Like, where does your eye go first? And it's the guy with the white shirt and the yellow pants. That's where your eye is drawn to first because everything else is so dark, and that's the one part that's lit up. The artist chose specifically how to do that. They did that on purpose to draw your eye to that point. So those are that's some of the things that artists make choices when they make art, and that's what form is. And then finally, content is the message that the artist is trying to communicate through the language of art. And this one tells a story. So on the 3rd of May, 1808, this happened in Madrid, Spain. The French soldiers were kicking out the royal family of Madrid. And some people, some citizens, tried to stop the French soldiers from exiling the royal family. And the French soldiers rounded up all the people that were getting in their way, all the citizens that were causing trouble, and they executed them. So here's the scene of them being executed. And that's the story. But look at, I talked earlier about the colors of this. That adds to the somberness of the story. How like a dark, depressing story this is, and the colors kind of help with that. But that's the content. The content is the meaning behind it. And if we can go past the story, we can talk about oppression of one group of people onto another, or we can talk about the horrors of war. That's also certainly the content of this image. And we can also talk about survival. And there's all kinds of ideas that we can throw in here when we discuss the content of the artwork. All right, and a final thing is I want to talk about is in books that we'll look at, and when you go online, how to decode the credit line. So, the first bit of information a credit line tells you is the artist name. So the picture that we were just dissecting, that artist name was Francisco Goya. And then the 3rd of May would be the title of the artwork. And 1814 would be the date that the artwork was made. And oil on canvas is the medium of the artwork. And then it tells the size. And so since we live here in America, we don't use the metric system like the rest of the world does. We use the imperial system. So it says 106 inches by 137 inches. And if you're aware of how many, and how big 106 inches is, I think we're talking about, with 137, I think we're talking about 10 feet. So it'd be 10 feet wide. Oh, by the way, over here on this, when you do size, its height is the first number, so it's 106 inches tall, and width is the second number, and that's how wide it is. And if it's a sculpture, it'll have the depth, which is the third number. And if you ever wanted to go and visit this artwork, you would go to Museo de Prada in Madrid, Spain. And then that'll be it for today. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I hope you learned something from it. And then I guess that'll be it. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.